Hello, and welcome to If Grapes Could Talk, your one and only source into the corrupt lives of wine country's elite. And who am I? Is Sonoma Academy worth $50,000 tuition? Well, those and many others are secrets I will happily tell. But as always, before we begin, I must remind you that this series is about real people and real corruption, and therefore can be very upsetting. Today's content warning is also going to serve as a bit of a vocabulary lesson. In previous episodes, when I talked about the former mayor of Windsor and dethroned wine country prince Dominic Fipoli, other high-profile cases, like the allegations against Harvey Weinstein and the Brock Turner case, was the swimmer at Stanford whose high-profile case was actually covered by BuzzFeed News, of all sources. Cases like that, in conversation with the Me Too hashtag, created by activist Tarana Burke, there really is a shared language that I can pull from to talk about serial predators and date rapists like Dominic Fipoli without having to go into detail for people to understand what I'm talking about. So in today's episode, when I shift to Sonoma Academy and primarily the allegations against founding humanities instructor Marco Moroni, we don't have that level of a shared understanding about what he's accused of, grooming. However, Sonoma Academy is not the only private school, not the only elite institution to be undergoing a reckoning right now with how it's handled misconduct by adults in that institution against children. So my hope is that we are in the midst of a similar reckoning and that we're beginning to develop a shared language that will allow us to actually do something and prevent grooming in the future. So to define grooming, I am pulling specifically from the National Association of Independent Schools website's definition, which is as follows. Grooming is a pattern of behavior in which a perpetrator lures a child into an abusive relationship and conceals that relationship so the abuse can continue. Offenders groom victims for abuse, but they also manipulate the people around the child, such as parents or teachers. This is often referred to as grooming the environment. Grooming helps overcome resistance, maintain access, and minimize disclosure, notes Stephen C. Brake, a psychologist whose practice centers on the evaluation of sex offenders. So it's very important to note that when we're talking about grooming, no, we're not necessarily talking about physical contact. We're talking about the process that leads to the adult's ability to have that kind of close physical contact with children, because if they were super overt and creepy about it, they wouldn't be able to. Or, as they put it on the website, people who abuse children are often extraordinarily charismatic. They have to be. As one school leader explains, no one is going to hand a child over to someone they think is creepy. Offenders may use personal charm to gain access to children and to lure them closer. Personal charm provides an alibi because no one could believe that someone so likable could harm children. So these are examples from the National Association of Independent Schools website of behaviors, grooming behaviors that an offender may engage in that it would appear Marco engaged in. The abuser searches for children with vulnerabilities that they can exploit. They may treat the child like an adult, which makes that child feel special or chosen. Offenders try to desensitize the child to touch by touching them in non-sexual ways first. And the offender may also violate boundaries by talking about inappropriate or overly personal matters, or exposing the child to pornography, or in Marco's case, the book Lolita. So I think it's important to understand what we're accusing Marco of. That Marco is not being accused of overt sexual abuse. However, fixating very narrowly on overt sexual abuse is exactly why he was able to teach for almost 20 years despite his emotional abuse of students. Historically, essay leaders fixated on whether something physical and sexual had happened to students and did not pay enough attention to the psychological and emotional impact of Moroni's conduct. So a really key thing that we, as even the public, can learn from this situation is that if we want to prevent overt sexual violence, we can get better at picking up on these red flags of grooming that offenders use in order to be able to get away with the abuse of children long term. So all of that is to say, one of the content warnings for this episode is grooming. Editing Rye here in honor of the essay I wrote my freshman year at Sonoma Academy. I am wearing my So Straight Xena and Gabrielle t-shirt. For those of you that know the classic 90s television series Xena Warrior Princess. So recording Rye was a bit nervous for this episode, was a bit rambly, making my life difficult. She kind of forgot the rest of the content warning. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish the content warning, and I'm gonna continue what she was doing. And I'm going to use the content warning sort of as the opportunity to relay to you what all of the allegations are against Marco Moroni. A lot of that information comes out from the Debevoise and Plimpton investigation, which is a third-party investigation done by Debevoise and Plimpton law firm. And that investigation was signed off on by both the Sonoma Academy trustees and the Athena Project, which is a group of Sonoma Academy alum that are advocating on behalf of the students that were harmed by Marco Moroni in particular. I received this report because I am an alum of Sonoma Academy. I graduated in 2009. So before I get into the additional allegations, just general content warning for sex abuse, physical abuse, harassment, bullying. The Sonoma Academy case is actually an even more disturbing case than you would realize just from reading the press coverage. This investigation was quite illuminating. This investigation found evidence of Marco grooming at least 34 students. He is also accused of harassment, actually, of staff, of his colleagues. I found this one quote particularly interesting. Moroni was also disrespectful to another male colleague on many occasions, including in one instance dragging his crotch over the seated faculty member's head before a meeting. Like, how is that not a fireable offense? Marco was also accused of physical assault of male students. He actually kicked one in the head and gave him a concussion in 2015. The school seemed to accept Marco's explanation that it was the student's fault that he had been kicked in the head. Investigative report summary ends as follows. The evidence demonstrated that Sonoma Academy administration made no further inquiry into what might justify a teacher kicking a student in the head, which is just astounding. The report also alluded to inappropriate sexual conduct with fellow staff members. In discussion with fellow alum, I think what this is talking about is he had sex with a colleague in a car in the parking lot. And Sonoma Academy, like, the parking lot is small. So that's just what Marco is accused of. As I get into the history of Sonoma Academy, there actually will be additional allegations against other adults associated with Sonoma Academy. So the content warnings for sex abuse, physical abuse, bullying, harassment, racism, that still applies to the rest of this episode. And I, as a Sonoma Academy alum, I graduated in 2009 and I took 3 courses with Marco: AP English Language, US History, and Creative Writing. He was also my mentor when I was the editor of the Sonoma Academy newspaper, The Print. Abusive teachers like Marco were a logical consequence of a bunch of non-education professionals egomaniacally setting out to create the best damn high school ever without doing any preliminary research. And the reason that recording Rye really struggled with this episode is that I am actively engaged right now in the process of receiving a clinical diagnosis for my autism and my ADD. And through that process and through some of the clinical interviews that I had to do about my childhood, I'm really starting to realize how that lack of planning impacted me as a disabled student and as a scholarship student who was in need of emotional support, because Sonoma Academy was a very different world than what I was used to. And it's clear to me now that Sonoma Academy did not properly prepare itself to meet the needs of a diverse student body. So I'm just really in the trenches of processing that right now, and it makes the Sonoma Academy episodes interesting. So I just wanted to share that with you, and I promise you that I am okay and I am supported, but it's just something that's going to continue to come forth as I cover Sonoma Academy and talk about my past at Sonoma Academy. All right, back to recording Rye. So to understand what I'm talking about, let's hop in the time machine and go actually not that far back for how prestigious an educational institution institution Sonoma Academy tries to present itself as, we only have to go back to 2001. Sonoma Academy is definitely the kind of school that acts as though it has a legacy. To me, in order for something to have a legacy, it needs to be like at least 100 years old. Sonoma Academy was founded in 2001. It essentially was founded with 10 large cash individual donations, the largest being a $4,049,035 contribution. And these are anonymous, just the way they've been discussed at various assemblies and so forth. My money would be that money came from Jess Jackson and Barbara Banke of Jackson Family Wines. Other notable trustees include Nancy Lasseter, the wife of John Lasseter, the disgraced former head of Pixar, who has acknowledged a pattern of serial sexual harassment of his employees. I want to further emphasize that Janet Durgin is definitely a founding leader, even if we could quibble over whether or not she qualifies as a founding trustee. She was the founding head of school, and it would appear that the founding trustees were really motivated to choose her as their founding head of school. And thus, anything that she did wrong is still somewhat on them. Like, I may harp on this point a little bit too much, but again, per Jess Jackson's biography, they like wooed her in a private helicopter ride. Like, when's the last time someone put that much effort into hiring you? I would feel very pressured by that. But also you could see how it's like very flattering too, you know? So yeah, I may harp on it, but like it is a fascinating point to me. Two additional trustees that are key founding trustees just in my life are Greg and Lisa French, who are interesting because, as I touched on in my episode about wine country media, which I'll link below, it was clear that Greg and Lisa French are two of the more connected people in Sonoma County, based on who they're rubbing elbows with. And Greg French actually was the one who had the, like, gonna make the best damn high school ever, fun, cool, hip, happening high school ever quote. That's where his priorities were at. And I've been somewhat on the fence about how much to dig into him in particular and his influence, and whether just to sort of let the trustees be a bit of an amorphous blob. And what I've ultimately decided, and I'm deciding this right now as I speak, Greg and Lisa, like his wife Lisa was also on the board. Like, I've been drunk on their property under the age of 21, and they had very different responses. Greg was fine with it, but he had certain rules that we followed to protect his liability. And Lisa really didn't like it. And I think that's really reflective of how things are with the trustees. A lax drinking culture at Sonoma Academy, meaning the normalization of binge drinking to the point it seemed tacitly condoned by the adult leaders at Sonoma Academy. That to me feels very related to what seemed like the tacit condoning of Marco's behavior as well. So basically what I'm saying is that to the outside observer, as a teen, it did look like all of the adults were tacitly condoning it because nothing was being done. But what I'm getting in reading how, Janet Durgin had an antagonistic relationship with Marco and was helping to build a case so that her successor could fire Marco. I'm reading that there were trustees who talked to the Debevoise investigators expressing frustration that it did take so long for Marco to get fired. And then when I reflect on my own experiences, like my year that we had prom, we actually had an unofficial sponsored prom after party that basically ensured that all of the kids would go to the same party, and that like drinking and some like marijuana use, like mild drug use, would be permitted, but there would be adults present in case anything unsafe happened. I'm telling the story to show the leaders at Sonoma Academy were clearly very conflicted, and that there were people within leadership that were trying to push back and do the right things from within. So where I'm at right now in my journey is trying to figure out within leadership who was team Marco, who was team do the right thing. And to be clear, when I say that this after prom party was an an example of people trying to do the right thing. I'm deeply conflicted about whether that party actually would qualify as doing the right thing. However, I think it does at least demonstrate that there were folks that were trying to get Sonoma Academy to try and take responsibility for the fact that Sonoma Academy students were being exposed to a binge drinking culture they most likely wouldn't be exposed to at other high schools in the area through their proximity to trustees like Greg French. In the next episode where I talk more about my personal experience at Sonoma Academy, you'll get more about what I'm talking about. Okay, back to 2001, Sonoma Academy's founding year. Despite the $4 million big money coming in from the Jacksons, all of these other major donors that they had connections to, you can't just pull the perfect campus out of your butt. So Sonoma Academy did have humble beginnings. While I was attending, they rented out space from the then Wells Fargo Center. It is now back, thankfully, to being the Luther Burbank Center. But yeah, we were renting space out of a theater, a performance art theater, essentially. And like, I had basketball practice in the parking lot. To their credit, they weren't charging $47,000 yet, but like, I paid more for Sonoma Academy than I did for Williams College, the #1 liberal arts college in the country. The founding trustees were very motivated to get Sonoma Academy off and running. To be perfectly honest with you, I think because they were founding it for their kids. Their kids were high school age when they were high school age. And so it was a rushed process, okay? Here's what Janet Durgin had to say. Many founders would have spent years conducting feasibility studies and may have balked at establishing the only independent high school in the county. But the founders believed in the transformative power of a great school and great teachers, and that if you build it, they will come attitude attracted the right staff, teachers, and students. We worked together to shape the culture, develop rituals and traditions, and create innovative and interdisciplinary programs. So the founders really believe that through this rushed process, they really established something solid to which to start building their legacy off of. Whereas in my opinion, the fact that they were trying to lean into a cool, hip, happening school, which meant that they were going to be looking at charismatic, fun, charming teachers. Without then doing the proper research, they were leaving themselves open to being the kind of school that predatory educators would flock to, because the encouragement to be close with students without accompanying razor-sharp boundaries to adhere to, they were setting themselves up for disaster. They don't really have credibility with me until they're willing to admit that. But they won't, because they want their legacy. So they don't want to have to admit that children were harmed because they rushed the process of establishing a school. So in 2001, Sonoma Academy opens its doors. By fall 2002, that's when we have the first documented incident of child sex abuse at Sonoma Academy by a assistant soccer coach, I believe, Shannon Brake. And this went on into fall 2003, when finally Sonoma Academy administration was notified and they did terminate the contract. However, the abuse continued and Sonoma Academy did zero to reach out to the student and offer them emotional support. So that's horrifying. Also in 2003, John Durgin, Janet Durgin's husband, becomes one of the top 5 salaried employees at Sonoma Academy, and throughout his tenure there, he will continue to make more money than most of my teachers as the director of connections. I had to spend a lot of time thinking and going through yearbooks before I finally remembered what the director of connections actually is. Connections was like our community service requirement. To sort of emphasize how ridiculous it is that he got paid more than teachers to do this, we got like notes, like narratives about our grades as well as our community service. And his one that he did for us was like a copied and pasted paragraph he did for everyone. Like if you were a parent reading it, it didn't even necessarily include the project that your kid did. And I was lucky enough that at least my senior year, he did include my project, but he said that I delivered food to AIDS victims, which is not true. I delivered it to AIDS and HIV positive patients. So to actually lump all of those folks together as AIDS patient or AIDS victims is incredibly insensitive and problematic. But yeah, top 5 salaried employee. I'm sure it has nothing to do with the fact that he's the husband of the founding head of school that the founding trustees wooed here in their helicopter. So in 2004, Sonoma Academy is about 3 years old now. The evidence shows that as early as 2004, members of the administration, including Janet Durgin, understood that Maroney favored female students and formed close relationships with them. A filmmaker came to campus, Adrian Bellick. He was teaching a short filmmaking course just for the month of January. It would appear that he abused 2 students as well. So that year we have our second teacher engaged in full-on abuse, and the administration is aware that Marco is engaging in grooming behavior, even if at the time they didn't necessarily know the word grooming. They knew that he was being weird with female students. And then 2005 is when I matriculate as a freshman. And I think that's where I'm gonna end this episode. And there's already 2 stories of Sonoma Academy. We have the true history, which is that a group of wealthy, elite people are kind of rushing the process to establish an elite school for their children, and quite a few problematic teachers are slipping through the cracks. And then we have my experience and the way that Sonoma Academy was branding itself as this inclusive, progressive, interdisciplinary, independent school. The issue for me as a student in Sonoma County is, like, I was intelligent. I did well on standardized tests, and in general, I wasn't particularly challenged in school. And because of my undiagnosed autism, so at the time, as a child, we just kind of knew that I was weird and socially awkward. Now we know that I had undiagnosed autism. The lack of challenge, like being challenged academically, and the fear of me being bullied for my queerness and just my general awkwardness made public school not feel like a choice for my family, and that was valid. But because, again, of the queerness and the weirdness, traditional religious private school didn't really feel like an option either. So I really was Sonoma Academy's target audience as far as scholarship students were concerned. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. If you liked learning a little bit more about the history of Sonoma Academy and the details of the allegations against the instructors there, please like this video and leave a comment. It really helps the algorithms. If you have not yet, please subscribe to my channel so that you'll be the first to know about my next episodes. I'm covering all kinds of fun topics now, so you never know when a new video is gonna be released. And here are my socials in case you would like to connect off of YouTube. Until next time, you know you love me. XOXO.